Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the sunset of our days, the time in which our breath, it wanes, and the time in which we say, it is now time for me to go through that door. What is it about? When we receive a diagnosis, when we find ourselves not being able to move through our days, and perhaps saying, I don't know, I don't see the light on the horizon yet, and how can I move through this process of end of life, of this time when loved ones may be going through the process. And we talk about grief and loss for not only ourselves, if we are the ones in the process, but also so for our families and our loved ones. Truly, this time that we call sunset of our lives is affecting everyone and everything within our whole parameter. Those people that we have loved, those people that we have engaged with, those people we are connected to, even someone we can just pass in the street. Everyone can feel the energy emanating from us. What is it? Is it about fear, loss, grief? Is it about saying, I don't want to go, or I'm ready to go? Can we honor everyone and everything that comes up? Every emotion is valid. Every feeling has just feel in every single set of your body. Can we allow that to happen? Or do we try to wall it off? Try to get through it. Try to find ways to fix it. Today my guest is John Allen. His book is Keep Calm and Cope with Grief. 9 chapters for managing fear and grief when losing a parent or a loved one. John, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Jeanette. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you, John, because I think so many people are finding that there have been events in the world, with this pandemic where people really their idea, their thoughts about health, about wellness, about end of life, going into the hospital, being cared for at the time of death, really became shattered, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think it changed so many lives and probably touched everybody, right? And once the pandemic hit, and it still affects our lives now, I think a lot of us are still going through it emotionally and in some cases physically, right? And a lot of us did lose our loved ones. So, yeah, it was a painful experience, and it continues to be that way, sadly.
I think prior to the pandemic, everybody had it in their head, over decades. If you've grown up, 50s, 60s, and 70s, you know what the process would be. You knew what you were going to do. Everything is, quote, in place. You kind of followed through, and you were going to be okay. But then when the pandemic came along and people were dropped off at the hospital door, not knowing what would happen. People, passed away in their homes by themselves. Others, it was very sudden, and they don't know. They didn't have things in place. Don't you think fear is the very first thing that we could talk about today? It's fear of, you can put whatever word after that you'd like, but it's just plain fear of the whole process that everyone is having come up with in their heart.
Yeah, definitely. I talk about that throughout all of my books, to be honest with you. It's the unknown, isn't it? It's the fear that we don't know. And the journey that I'm personally on, and I could use the word ridiculous, because I'm looking for answers. I'm trying to find the answers, and I'm sure if any of us could find that answer, it would change the world completely, right? But I just can't help myself. I want to know what happens after this life. Now, I'm a Christian, and, I went to the school of St. John Bosco in England. I went to seminary school at the point where I believed I was going to be a priest. So religion played a big part in my youth. But now that I'm 58, and I have questions. I just can't help it. I'm being honest. I have questions, and the fear is there. It's mellowed for me since I lost my dad 4 years ago. It was actually at the start of the pandemic, in, I would say, February 2020 and early March, when my dad told me he had cancer. And his words were, "I'm riddled with it. You know, I'm going to die, Richard." And so I must clarify something. My first name is Richard, but my author name is John Allen, which is my dad's name. And actually, my full name is Richard John Allen. Some of my friends call me John, actually, which is ironic. But anyway, so when my dad told me he had cancer, fear, I'd never lost anybody in my life before, so fear was in my life. I was like, what happens? Oh, my gosh, you know, I was terrified. And I knew that my dad was going to pass because he told me there's nothing they can do. They can put him on radiation and chemotherapy to slow it down, but he would pass. So it's that fear that really grips hold of us. And each of us have to figure out a way of being able to cope with that fear. And that there are ways, there's multiple ways we can do this. It's not easy. For some it might be, but for the majority of us, I'm sure it's not. It's a challenge, but we can get through it, and we can be at peace with it if we can find that way.
I think the biggest thing is once we hit the word fear, it's all about our consciousness. All of a sudden, we have this mind chatter that just won't stop. It's like it can be decades of whatever that wasn't said, wasn't done, what was this, what was that, what they want, what they don't want. And it's this mind chatter. It's almost as if your head explodes, you know?
Yeah.
And so many times patients would come to me and they would say, you know, my doctor said I'm kind of at the end and I need you to save me. And I'm like, okay, it's awesome that you're here because we're going to now say, how can we spend our days versus how are we going to be saved? And I think really the very first part is that when you hear a diagnosis or if you're in that state or something happens, the very first instinct is save, fix. At all costs, save and fix. Perhaps?
Yeah, and I think it's because that's all we can do as a human. If we knew the answer to that question, what's on the other side? I'm about to come to the end of this mortal life that I have. This body of mine is about to end, you know, and my soul and spirit is about to move on or go somewhere, right? Where is that somewhere? And ironically, Dr. Jeanette, it was about a year ago, my wife and I were sitting on the sofa in our house, and I love having these discussions with my wife because we go down that rabbit hole. And I asked her, and I said, my name's Alison. I said, Alison, let me give you two scenarios about our mother. We lost her mother 2 years ago during the pandemic, and she lived in a retirement home in Georgia, which is a 6-hour drive for us. And I said to Alison, I said, okay, let me give you two scenarios. The first one is that when your mum is about to pass away, she's taken from the retirement home, and she goes through the doors, and then on the other side, she enters a rocket ship, if you like, and she flies off to the moon, and she's reunited with your dad or her husband, and she's in a lovely place, and she's all happy. Now, Alison, you're going to see this on a video screen here where we live in North Carolina. So you'll see your mum travel to this place on the moon, and she's happy, and she's passed over, and call it heaven, but we'll just call it the moon for now, and that's where she's going to be. And you can see this on the screen. Now, the other scenario is your mum goes through, you get the phone call, your mum's passed, and you know she's gone through those doors at the retirement home to go to the rocket ship, but you don't see anything, and you don't know. I said, so how would you feel with either scenario? And she goes, well, the first one, I would feel happy because I can see my mum. I know she's happy and she's smiling. I know she's passed, but I can see a journey to heaven, to the moon. But the other one, I don't know what's beyond those doors. I don't know where she is or how her spirit has traveled. And it was a great conversation, and it's that fear of the unknown. If we could see what was on the other side, if we had proof or evidence, and we absolutely knew without doubt, a lot of people may not be so fearful of coming to the end of this life that we have in this body. And it's because we don't know. A lot of people haven't got that belief or that faith or the experience through the life that's put them in a position to say, you know what, when it's my time, I'm okay. I'm ready. And it's difficult. You know, I get people writing to me every day and sharing these thoughts and feelings. You know, I've lost this parent or this sister or brother, and how can I cope? And it's trying to put people's minds at peace that I personally 100% believe that there is life after this and that we will see our loved ones again. So I'm at peace with it, but it took me 4 years to get here after losing my dad, and it's put me on this journey. So I'm at peace with it now.
I think your book, Keep Calm, is about just before or just as that door closes. And it really is a great guidebook because you really talk about things that would be happening, an obituary, a legacy, a eulogy, what happens when someone is at that point of passing, about their last breath. You know, there's been a lot of talk, you know, recently of, oh, we want them to die at home because we're so afraid of the hospital process, or they'll be, quote, out of control. You know, I speak with patients about this all the time. It says, do you really realize what it will mean when you see your loved one in front of you struggling for their last breath? It's not just at 1 second. It can be days. It could be a very long, extended period of time. Do you understand that? And then also, too, the idea of many times people will say, but I don't want them all hooked up to this, that, or the other. So the idea of, let's talk about when you get a diagnosis and you're at that point of where do you decide you want your last breath to be taken. If you have a choice, what is a true option, you know? In the hospital, I think a lot of times people are saying, but I don't want them to. And it's really about the loved ones that are left behind that are making all the decisions because of their own fears versus the patient, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's hard to use the word, like I was going to say, it's amazing. And that sounds like a good thing, but I'm not trying to play this as being like a joyful experience in life when you lose somebody. But it is amazing that we truly go through this in our own way. Everybody's unique in how they cope with the loss of a loved one or the losing a loved one while the loved one is still with them, how they cope with this. And a classic example is my sister. I only have one sister and myself. So when we lost our dad, I broke down. You know, I was lost. I didn't go to the gym anymore. Mentally and physically, I was broken. My dad was my rock, and he still is. And for 4 years, I've not carried this pain with me. I hope it never goes away because I embrace it now. But my sister, she told me, when I visit England and go back to see my family over there, my sister has told me she is not grieved yet. She has not begun to grieve. So she's coping with this in a different way. Now, whether she's shutting it out and that's how she's coping and dealing with it, I don't know, but it's different. And to your point, when somebody's on their last days, it's difficult for that person who is going to cross over. Do they want to be at home, surrounded by familiar surroundings and the family and friends, or do they want to be in hospital? I guess it's their choice if they can choose. And as you pointed out, maybe it's the family and friends who are making that decision for them. Yeah. And we have to honor and respect the actual person and ask them, what do they want? I know it's hard not to be selfish in a situation like that, right? Because you want what's best for you and maybe not for your loved one. But we need to take a step back and ask them if they can, what do you want, Dad? What do you want, Mum? Would you rather be here or come home? And if there's a choice, let them make that choice, In
your book, you also have so many steps. I mean, I love the book, Keep Calm, because it has so many answers to so many questions that people don't even think about, or else their mind just freezes and they can't think about it. Like with a funeral, what to do, how to be able to walk through the process. I can honestly tell you, probably better than 75% of the patients that I work with do not have things in order. And I mean, I'm going, okay, but you're in your 80s and your 90s. You've had a lot of time to think about it, but you have nothing in order. And they're like, well, I'm just going to go. But that's wonderful in their aspects of their thoughts, because it is true. They are just going to go. They don't have to worry about what's behind them. However, sometimes those things sort of benefit the people that are left behind, the people who feel like they have a hole in their heart, the people who have to take care of all the logistics that haven't been taken care of, the people who now need to set up the process by which your body may be able to go to its final resting place. So I think there's a lot to be said about when the patient does pass away, yes, that they are free and they are on the other side, and they don't need to worry about that. But there are those others things that need to be done. Don't you think that your book is really a great guidebook and an overview to say, take it right in the side of the pages, check it off. I did this, I did that. I didn't remember about this, perhaps?
Yeah, and you know, I didn't intend it to be that way, Dr. Jeanette. It was, my English, I'll be honest, my English is terrible. My grammar is terrible. I'd never written a book in my life. I was actually working for one of America's largest insurance companies here, and I was there for 15 years. And then when my dad told me he had cancer, and we flew over there in February 2020 to see him for a week. It was a horrible time that week we were there, but I was with my dad. Anyway, the pandemic hit, and then I couldn't go back because of the travel ban. And in November, my dad passed. And fortunately, we flew over, my wife and I was with my dad 2 days before he passed. So I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. So long story short, we had to wait 3 weeks before we could have the funeral because of the pandemic. And then when we came back to the United States, it was my wife, Alison, who said, Richard, you should write a book. I was like, no, I can't do that. And she goes, Rich, you're really good at communicating. Please, you would help people. Try and write a book and see how it turns out. So I started to doodle. And before you knew it, I had 9 chapters. And as you've just said, and I only realized this, honest to goodness, I only realized about a year ago that when I look back at this book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, it is pretty much a guide. Yes. Because it does cover, you know, the step-by-step that I went through and that we'll all go through. But I'd never been through this before. I was 54 at the time I lost my dad. And call it luck, but I'd never lost anybody close to me before. But at the age of 54, it was like a sledgehammer. It was like, boom, you've lost your dad, Rich. Right. What do you do now? And I'm like, whoa, I'm in Liverpool with my mum, trying to console my mum and my sister. The 3 of us are devastated. And now I have to pick up the pieces, as they do too. And we have to organize a funeral. Who do we invite? You know, when we go to the crematorium, what do we do there? What's the service? I have to speak to the priest. And can I speak at the altar? Do I give a sermon or a speech? Or the obituary, the eulogy? It was all of these things. Not to mention my dad's passport, driver's license, all the utility bills on my mum's house. I think in the book I mentioned this. I know we do. And there was 27 different companies I had to contact to remove my dad's name or cancel them. And it could be things like my dad's pension, my dad's life insurance. It was so many things I had no idea, whether it was the internet or the cable TV, my dad's cell phone. It was overwhelming. But I did it all for him, and I did it for my mum. And I left my mum in a place when I came back to America that everything was taken care of, that all the accounts were in order. My dad's pension was now going into my mum's account. All the bills were on auto pay, so my mum had to worry about nothing. And that's the least I could do to help my mum. But you're right, if you're the person passing, you don't really think so much, or most of us don't, and it might happen quickly where you haven't got time to plan. So the people who are left living have to pick up those pieces, and it can be very traumatic. But hopefully this book helps, you know.
I think it really does, and I think also, too, the idea is that there are many elders who die alone, and we have to think about that, too, that they don't have things in place, but I don't think that we need to have grief around it about shame or guilt that we didn't do something. I think we have to sometimes say, if we are truly believing in a God or a religion or whatever that might be, is that God had a plan. If I wasn't there, then maybe he didn't want me to be there. Maybe they didn't want me to be there. And I think truly trust in the process of the universe, so to speak, because if you don't, that will accumulate into an absolute mountain of anger, of hurt,
right.
of pain, and grief in a bag that you're going to be carrying around that's going to be, it's going to encompass your entire being. Really, it's going to take over you. And that's truly what we're saying is that pay attention. If something happens, just go into your place, go to your priest, go to whatever it might be, and say, can you help me through this? This is what I'm feeling, this anger, this pain, this grief, and it's coming from this source that I shame, guilt, or I didn't do something. And how can I process this? And I think right then and there, if you start working through that process, that's when you really start saying, am I walking through this with the best information I have available at this time? Perhaps?
That's right. I mean, it's very easy for us to judge, isn't it, about anything, especially at a time like loss and grief. I mean, could I judge my sister? Why isn't my sister crying? Why isn't she grieving and upset? I wouldn't dream of judging my sister on her emotional state right now.
Right.
If she's told me I haven't begun to grieve for my dad, I just don't know how to, Rich. And it's like, well, that's okay. You know, it's funny, this was many, many years ago. Somebody told me that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because we're supposed to listen twice as much as we speak. And at times like this, when you lose a loved one, I think that's very, very important to listen. Listen what other people are saying rather than like speaking what you think you should do. Of course, we have to communicate and talk to people, but you can say things like, how can I help you? What can I do? Like for my mum, when I go over there, even now, you know, we communicate all the time on WhatsApp. But when I go over there, the first thing is, Mum, what can I do? I know my dad's not here to do the odd jobs around the house. So what can I do for you, Mum? So I do yard work. I fix the door on the shed. I fix the leaky shower head in the bathroom. You know, I do all the chores while I'm there, and my wife helps me too. But we need to be there for those people. I can't sit there and who am I to judge other people? And we've got to remember that. We've got to sympathize and be there in a nurturing and helpful way, you know? It's not the time or place to be judging people. It really isn't.
But I think also, too, John, you're talking about a situation in which there's a loving relationship in the first place. Let's talk for a moment about those end of life or a diagnosis or whatever, and there are no loving relationships within the family unit or within people around them. There's a lot of angst. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of unresolved stuff. There's a lot of, hey, I never kind of grew up and it doesn't really matter and I've been like this my whole life. So also, too, I look at those patients and at that time and I say we're going to do the best we can and understand that, because not everybody is supposed to have a roly-poly life and an exit, you know, and I think that's very important, because people will say, oh, well, I sat down with them and they told me their story and it was so absolutely wonderful, but there's no way I'm ever going to have that story because we're on the other side of the coin. We can't even communicate. And I think that's vitally important to understand, is that if that is the case, accept it. You can't communicate. Accept it. Accept that there's going to be stress and grief and anger. Accept it. And instead of trying to fight it and say, oh, well, I'm going to fake it, I'm going to do this, I'm going to stay away from them, I'm not going to be there for the process or whatever it is, try to do your very best, because that's what's going to get yourself through this process. People forget, and they think that when someone passes on, it really takes a toll on you that's left behind. The difference is it now going to take such a toll on you if you're left behind that you are the next one to go? And I've seen that quite often. You know,
that's right.
The person will leave, and then there will be one right behind them because they could not get to that next space. Perhaps?
That's right, absolutely. My wife's parents, they parted each other just 18 months. You know, we lost her father first in 2022, and then early 2023 or middle of 2023, we lost her mother because she's alone now, right? They were both living in a retirement home, and so no doubt that her mother was struggling, was finding it hard, and we went down there sometimes twice a month. We drove down to Georgia to be with her mother and support her, but it's hard. And to your point, Dr. Jeanette, the people that are out there on their own and who are about to cross over, I'd like to think that there are carers around them who will be those like supporting, kind of like their own last-minute family, if you like. You know, they're the ones who are going to hold the hand and give them that love and support, listen to those stories. Even the work that you do, you know, caring for these people who are coming to the end of life. It's people like you that are so important, because those people who don't have a close family, and let's be honest, me being from England, you probably know this, but England is so small. It's the size of North Carolina geographically. Wow. So it's a small country. But the United States is so big, it's massive. And so my point is, I could have, you could be living in North Carolina, but your parents might be living in California, and you can't be there with your father or your mother or your sister or uncle, whoever's on the threshold of crossing over, and you can't be there. So you're really relying on those carers, those doctors, those nurses, those care people to be there in those last days and moments for them. And hopefully those people, and I know they are, they're being there and being supportive and giving them comfort in those last seconds before they leave this life. And that's what I hope and pray for, because it's hard enough when you've got your family around, but when you're alone like that, I can't imagine. So it's carers like yourself that we need in this world. We need more people like you.
Also, too, I think of the idea is that when someone is left behind, they say, now how do I go on? Because they feel less than. In other words, they were so attached energetically to the other person that they physically cannot breathe. And I think that's a very, if we've learned anything from the pandemic, I would hope that it would be that, is that people can leave in a minute. Yes, you can go on, and we all need to process this exiting plan. Those three things. If we could possibly look at those, might we turn around and say, I can live fuller for today, and this is a great day, and make better choices, or make choices that you let other people know you love them, or whatever that might be. And some of that angst towards the end of our sunset will kind of reduce, because it's almost as if we've been walking through the process, and we kind of like, oh, it's not as unfamiliar or as scary as I possibly thought it could be. It can be this way, maybe? Yeah,
exactly, yeah. I know in my personal experience, it's been 4 years for me going through this, and I'm in a totally different place. You know, I'm in I'm sure we've all heard about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the 5 stages of grief, and going through denial and bargaining, anger, depression, and then finally acceptance. And I believe I'm in the acceptance stage now. That's not to say that I mightn't go back to depression or anger, right? Or denial even. But there are those stages, and a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists out there believe there's many more than 5 stages now. It's much more complex. But yeah, we need to figure out a way to navigate this path that we're on. And you know, and I know that people mean well. And they try to comfort you when they see that you're upset about losing a loved one. They come around and they talk to you. But sadly and unfortunately, some of them might say things like, oh, come on, shake it off. It's been 4 years since you lost your dad. Get over it. You've got to move on. And that's not helpful at all. And God bless him. I've got a friend of mine who did that to me about 6 months ago. And he said to me, come on, Rich, you need to shake this off and move on, because I was having a bad day. And that doesn't help, I think you have to respect people's space, their moment in that time where they're feeling that pain of loss. And you need to support them in a loving way, not a judgmental way.
Right.
Because, telling somebody, snap out of it, that's not going to do anybody any good, I'm afraid. But I always like it to go back to the ideas that when you are coming into this other part, I like, they have acceptance at the end. I always say, no, we're putting acceptance first. That's number one. That's the first stage. I accept that there is a change in me. I accept that there is a change in my world. If you can stop right there at number one, it really shifts and changes some of those other, whatever those other steps are. Don't go there anymore. It's like, accept it today. And then when you accept it, you say, what is the next step? The next step is breathe. There's nothing else. Yeah.
If you accept it, and then you breathe, and then you say, okay. Those three things are the very first steps that once you get there, it's going to keep your body still operating,
Yeah,
It's going to keep it operating within this paradigm that you believe, I'm going to focus on my breath, it's going to be okay, and I accept this moment. And when you can do that, I think that seriously shifts your perspective going forward. And when you talk about, when someone says shake it off, I'll say, oh, that's awesome. It's been 4 years, it's awesome. Because you're still saying that you have a loving relationship, and you're letting me, and you're reporting it to me. You're sharing your story.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
I think it hurts us so much because we love them so much, And I think if, I'd be confused if I wasn't grieving for my dad. It was like when I lost my dog too. I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole on losing a pet. I felt guilty because when I lost my dog 2 years ago, I was crying 24/7. Well, maybe not when I was asleep, but I felt like I was grieving more for my dog than I was for my dad, and I felt guilty. But I've come to terms with that now because it's a different type of love that we have for a pet, because they're more dependent on us, right? But nevertheless, I mean, if we can, like you said, acceptance, if that was the first step. I mean, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross doesn't put these in any particular order, but if we can just, acceptance is number one, and we stop it right there. Let's just pump the brake and stop, and keep it there day by day by day, for at least as long as we can, because as humans, we can falter, and we might end up in depression or anger or one of the other five. But if we can keep an acceptance and bounce back to it and stay there as long as we can, it's beneficial, obviously. And it's better for us. And it's better for our relationships with our family, friends, co-workers, because, as you know, when you're suffering through this and you're going through loss, it does change your character and personality temporarily. But it can affect your marriage. It can affect your work, your relationship with your boss at work. And you don't want those things. You don't want to have a negative impact on your life. As much as it probably will affect those things, you've got to try and control it and contain it as best you can. And that's the whole thing about trying to cope. You need to find a way to be able to cope with this loss and grief.
Right, because if you had gone into work and said, and they started whatever at you, or you started feeling bad, you could say, please, I'm in this stage of acceptance. I'm accepting that I have this event that happened. Yeah. And can you accept me at my whatever it is today? And once you can accept each other, I think that's when you can say, am I free to be able to breathe unconditionally, or to have the emotions or whatever that might be? And once you're able to do that, I think that it truly is about building it going forward, because we've seen many people, they have so much grief that their life actually implodes backwards, just as you said. Jobs get lost, relatives get lost, whatever. But if you can accept it and breathe for that moment, you're going forward. You will go forward, but you will still hold intact that person that you are. And isn't that, I think, in closing, we can say, are we allowing the process of grief to also take us and destroy us and our way of life? is that valid? Perhaps?
Right. It is. It's a test to us, isn't it? Really, as humans, it really is a test. It's like, here we are. We've lost a loved one, and we have this emotion. And my opinion is that grief is the most complex of the emotions that we go through in life. And now we're being tested. We have to somehow figure out a way to cope with this and accept it. One way or another, we have to get to that point, like you said, we have to accept it. And if we can do it on day one, fantastic. If we can hold on to that, it'll just make everything so much easier and so much better. And you know what? I still have days where I break down and cry, and cry and cry, and that's okay. But then I've got to shake it off, gather myself, and keep moving on. It doesn't mean that I'm letting my dad go. It doesn't mean that I'll never cry again. But we do have to accept what's happened. I mean, we can't turn back time, right? So life does go on, that old cliche, and we have to accept what's happened. And in my heart, I know 100% we'll be with our loved ones again. I truly and firmly believe that. I still get signs from my dad. I get them all of the time. My wife is a scientist, so she believes in data and proof and evidence. But now that we've been together for 9 years, and when we lost my dad 4 years ago, she's actually seen some of these signs, and now she's a believer. She 100% believes that there is life after this because she's witnessed these things that have happened, and it blows her away. So I believe 100%.
Well, John, it was a pleasure to speak with you today because I think so many people are still stuck within paradigm of loss and grief and pain and hardships. And it's about being able to say, can we put all that on the table? Open it all up, explore it, see what its real truth and value is all about, see why you're holding on to for so long, and maybe explore those emotions and those feelings and see where they take you. So I think that your book, Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, is truly a guidebook to be able to help us process, yes?
I do, yes. Like you said before, I didn't realize it was a guide, but looking back now, it's an absolute guide. It can help you to prepare if your loved one is with us now and they're about to cross over, and it can also help you once that moment has happened and they have crossed over. So it really is a guide to help, yes.
Wonderful. John, can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work?
Yeah, if they go to my website, it's simple. It's richardjohnallen.com. richardjohnallen.com. Go to my website. You'll see more about me, my other books, and the podcasts that I've spoken on, and you can actually contact me there too. There's a contact link that you can click. But if you go to richardjohnallen.com, yeah.
Very good. Well, John, it was a pleasure to have you with us today. We thank you so much for joining us, and perhaps you'll come on with one of your other books, and we thank you so much for inspiring us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeanette. I appreciate it. Thank you.
If you'd like to find out more information about John Allen, again, the book is Keep Calm and Cope with Grief, 9 chapters for managing fear and grief, losing a parent or loved one. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to his website for more information. And it is about saying, where I am today, what is it? Accept it. Bring it out. Put it on the table. Open it up and explore it. Because everyone has feelings and emotions. Everyone has loss and grief. And everyone is trying to find a way to navigate this world in this where we are in these days. I mean, life is changing so dramatically. Even in the year 2025, we have no clue what the world will unfold. But it's about being able to say, how can we feel into what we're feeling? How can we explore it? How can we share with others? And how can we guide each other to wherever we are? Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettgallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.